So we've all heard those old timers say, man, the rain's coming, the barometric pressure's dropping, these fish are gonna be biting like crazy. But then we get to the stream, nothing. So what's going on? What is this barometric pressure and what does it do to fish? Let's dig into it a little bit and see if we can figure it out. So last week I had an opportunity to go fishing on the Cranberry. I had a couple days to choose from, so I looked at the barometer, looked at the weather. I was like, the pressure's gonna be dropping on Thursday. I'm gonna go on Thursday, catch tons of fish. I'm gonna look at using pellet baits. I'm gonna use some egg flies, and I'm gonna see if trout tend to focus more on genetics, which would be the salmon eggs, or conditionings, which would be the trout pellet flies. When I got there, the sun was bright, all the fish were buried down deep, wouldn't hit nothing, wouldn't chase nothing. Tough fishing. It wasn't until later in the evening when the sun dropped down and got below the horizon that the fish got active and they moved up into the shallow waters and started going after my bait. Did go after the salmon egg every time and not the pellet fly. So that tells me even though most of them spent a year being conditioned to eat pellet flies, genetics overrode that and they chose the egg fly every time. So in order to understand exactly how barometric pressure impacts fish, we first have to understand barometric pressure. So barometric pressure is the weight of the atmosphere that's pressing down on us right now. So yes, air has weight, and that weight changes from day to day based on low pressure fronts, high pressure fronts, all kinds of different things. Elevations change that. So when that mass of air that's over top of us right now pushes down on us hard, it squeezes us, but we don't really feel it because air is compressible, not that big a deal. But when that air squeezes down on water, it passes that pressure through the water column, throughout the base of the stream and all around. Water not being compressible is a big deal to fish, and it wouldn't be if they didn't have a swim bladder, but that swim bladder has air. So any change in barometric pressure is a big deal to fish, and we don't notice it, but it changes their everyday life and how they react. So most people think about pressure, they think about barometric pressure. But water also exerts pressure on fish. People don't notice the barometric pressure as much. Pressure changes because it's air, and air is compressible. Water is not compressible. So the deeper you go in water, the more pressure there is. Scuba divers, we know it. We have to get certain depths. We have to pop our ears because the pressure in our ears is less than the pressure outside. Fish have that same kind of pressure from the water depth in addition to barometric pressure. They notice it a lot more because although water is non-compressible, the air in their swim bladder is. So when they go deep, it presses in on that swim bladder and reduces their buoyancy. So fish are constantly forced to find depths in the water that matches the pressure in their swim bladder, and then they can adjust it slowly over time so that they get to where they want to be. So water's not compressible, unlike air. So I can push on this all day long, and I can put a pretty good mark on my hand. No matter how hard I push that, it is not going to compress that water. So when you get air and it pushes down on that water, so the harder it pushes on the water, the more it compresses the air in the swim bladder of the fish. When that pressure is released, the swim bladders expand back out. When that water compresses, it compresses that swim bladder, which makes them sink, makes them feel squeezed, and they just are lethargic and don't want to do anything. Barometric pressure, on the other hand, when it lessens the weight of it, or you have a drop in barometric pressure, that puts less pressure on the top of that water. Less pressure on the top of that water causes the fish's swim bladder to expand. When it expands, it gets more buoyant, forces the fish to the surface. Don't force them there, but it makes them want to go to the surface to equalize that pressure. But instead, most of the time, they'll dive deeper into the pools. So if we look at this underwater footage from the other day when I was on the Cranberry, barometric pressure is dropping. I get there, we look at the fish, I can see them plain as day, the big golden rainbow trout. They're laying in the bottom of these pools. They are tight to the bottom, not moving. Not chasing baits, not chasing anything, not even scared of me. They're just stick tight to the bottom. So why are they doing that? Well, we have to dig into their swim bladder. In order to do that, I made a handy dandy little contraption that's going to show you exactly what happens to the fish when the barometric pressure changes. So let's take a look at it. So this is my barometric pressure simulator. So I want you to imagine a 4-foot deep creek with a black fish in it. All right. So above this creek is the atmosphere. So barometric pressure is the amount of pressure that the atmosphere is putting down onto the surface of the water. All right. So that pressure increases and decreases. So know that barometric pressure is just one part of the whole fish world. You've got temperature, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, conductivity, pH, weather patterns, you name it, velocities, habitat. This is just one part of it. So don't let this make your decision. But if all other things are equal, then pay attention to barometric pressure. It can help you decide what is a good day to go and what's a bad day to go. And Pascal's principle tells us that the amount of pressure being put on the top of the water is being added to the weight of the water and is pushing out. So if I push down 100 pounds on the top of this water, that water is going to push out 100 pounds in addition to what the weight is pushing out, the weight of the water. So as the barometric pressure increases, it increases the pressure in the water. So we're going to simulate an increase in barometric pressure using a pump. We add more barometric pressure and then our fish just sinks. So why it sinks is because when we add that additional pressure to the top of the water, that pressure pushes on his swim bladder an equal amount. When you push in on that swim bladder, you decrease its volume, which decreases its buoyancy, which causes the fish to sink. Fish don't generally like this. They don't like to be squeezed and be forced to go to the bottom. The alternative to this is when the barometric pressure is decreasing. That decrease in pressure is just like lifting a weight off the top of that water. And when you lift the weight off that water, we get the opposite effect. I'm going to put a little bit of vacuum on this tube, which simulates the air column being lifted or the weight dropping. Doesn't take much to lift the weight off that before that balloon floats to the surface. And why it floats to the surface is the pressure to squeezing on that balloon is now let up a little bit, causing the balloon to expand, increasing its volume and making it more buoyant. So when that happens, fish have to come to the surface to negate the pressure change. They don't generally like being at the surface because it's sunny and they feel vulnerable, so they'll swim down. But they also know that this is a cue that a storm's coming. And so they want to feed before they're forced to go down deep when that pressure increases. The best time to fish is when the fish is naturally being pulled to the surface due to the biology, and there's food. So it's actively looking for food and it has the drive to come to the surface. So the best time to fish, if all other parameters are equal, is when the barometric pressure is dropping. So trout are known as being physostomous. And physostomous means that they have a connection between their swim bladder and their esophagus. So they can adjust their pressure in their swim bladder faster than, say, a bass or a walleye. Those fish are physoclistus, which means that there is no connection between the swim bladder and the esophagus. All of their pressure regulation is done through a blood-air connection that the bloodstream has to either put air in or take air out of that swim bladder. So that's why they adjust a lot different. And if you want to know if your fish is physostomous or physoclistus, that change in less advanced versus more advanced fish happens about the same time that the scales go from being cycloid to being stenoid. So if you rub your fish and it's smooth both directions, then that fish has cycloid scales. That's your muskie, your trout, your pike, Anything that's got a smooth surface, all your minnows, your suckers, they're all physostomous, which means they all have that connection between their esophagus and their swim bladder. All the fish that have stenoid scales, they're kind of smooth going back, and if you come backwards on the fish, they're rough. It's because they got tennae on their scales, and it's rough. So they have the physoclistus connection between their swim bladder and their bloodstream. So that's a quick way to tell the difference. So if you get nothing else from this video, just understand there's 4 basic conditions that fish worry about in barometric pressure. One is stable conditions, stable barometric pressure over a couple of days. Fish act normal. They're where they should be. They go after the baits that you think they would go after. Everything is normal. The next one is a rise in barometric pressure. That's the one that causes an increase of pressure on that water. As that water pressure increases, the size of their swim bladder decreases. That makes them less buoyant. They sink to the bottom, they feel pressurized, they feel like they're being squeezed. They just want to lay at the bottom and do nothing. In order to catch fish on days like that, you've got to hit them right in the nose. It's got to be really realistic looking baits, smaller. They're just not active. They're not wanting to chase those baits down. Then we have a low pressure system where it is putting less pressure on the surface of the water. And there's 2 types of low pressure systems. There's the kind that we have in the summer where you have a pop-up thunderstorm, but for the most part, it's sunny outside. Well, that lowering barometric pressure, releasing pressure from the water, but it comes with sunshine, and that's the key. The sunshine overrides the drop in barometric pressure, so the fish, once again, they'll go to the bottom because of the sun, not because of the barometric pressure, but they don't want to feed. So you have to hit them right on the nose, you have to be accurate and slow. The other one is a low pressure system that's coming in, is decreasing the barometric pressure. That causes the fish to put on a feed bag. They know that a big storm's coming, it's cloudy, they gotta feed as much as they can. So they're gonna be out there aggressively chasing down baits, getting ready to hunker down for the big storm.